Hello and welcome to the world today. The war in Yemen has been going on for some years now, and the country has lost its sovereignty. It has been occupied by Saudi Arabia. Drone attacks are common. Tortures, atrocities carried out by Saudi troops are known about, and yet in the West there is very little sympathy for this country which has been independent for many years now. So what can we do about the Yemen? With me today is Thanos Petouras, of Greek origin, who I first met in Aden in southern Yemen many years ago, and who took me through the situation in that city and in that part of the country with fantastic facility and ease. Thanos is a researcher in the Yemen and has been for many years, and is better informed than most journalists writing or not writing about the Yemen, as the case may be. Thanos, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell me a bit first, just to establish this. When did you first go to the Yemen, and in what circumstances and why?
I happened to go to Yemen to teach English in 2005, about 11 years ago. And that was at a time when a lot of Western students were going to the country, particularly to learn Arabic. Yemen has been known as a place where the classical form of the language is being spoken.
Pure Arabic.
Yes, quite. It is a country where one can experience Arabic civilization in its purer form, if you will. And back in the day, it attracted a lot of students of the Middle East as a place where one could spend their time cheaply, but also getting to immerse themselves into local culture and civilization. So I eventually ended up spending 2.5 years living in Yemen, but also doing further research on the politics and its history, particularly the British colonial past of southern Yemen.
Thanos, just take us through the timeline. What has been happening from it began while you were there till now? Let's start with the uprising against the Salah regime.
That took place in the early 2011. President Ali Abdullah Saleh had been ruling the country for over 30 years. Firstly, as the president or dictator, if you will, of North Yemen, and after 1990, when the North and the Socialist South united of the whole of Yemen, he's got a tendency to call himself the architect of modern Yemen, and I believe that that's how he sees himself, as the person who managed to bring the whole nation together for the first time in its 1,000-year-old history. The 2011 youth uprisings in Yemen can be seen both as part of the wider uprisings that took place in the Arab world, what we call the Arab Spring, but also, and more importantly, they were part of fissures and breaks that started to emerge in Saleh's rule over the years, and particularly after he was re-elected in 2006. The country has got perhaps the largest percentage of young population in the region. Almost 70% of Yemenis are below the age of 30. The Yemeni regime has always failed the expectations and needs of these people in terms of their education, employment, but also in remoter areas of the country in terms of the basic needs of food, and stability and medical care. So it all came to a head in 2011. The youth of the major cities of Yemen, the capital Sana'a, but also Aden and Taiz, came out to the streets. We're talking about a very thin crust, if you like, of the youth of the country, educated, with a lot of times foreign connections, people who'd experienced the world beyond their country, and they knew how the rest of the world was living.
And they're connected via the internet and the web in many cases.
Yes, yeah. Although internet penetration in Yemen is quite low, it remains around the 5% mark. The vast majority of people do not have access to internet, if they even have access to electricity. But these youth started to form revolutionary spaces in the major cities. They created their own camps where they would discuss the future of the country. They would come together with women, activists, even tribesmen from the countryside, and discuss what their expectations were of the government. And of course, also debate what was happening in the rest of the Arab world, and seeing one after the other the Arab leaders being toppled, they would envisage something similar to happen. The response of the regime wasn't the same across the board. In the northern cities, where students belong to mostly to families that are affiliated to tribes, they tried to contain them in those camps that they had set up. In the southern parts of the country, the regime felt more vulnerable because at the same time there was a renewed sense of nationhood among the southerners. They were increasingly demanding for independence, to secede and re-establish the southern state as it was.
I remember, Thanos, when I was there, speaking to quite a lot of young people and sometimes old people as well, and they were all pretty much convinced from different points of view that South Yemen had been independent for a long time under the British colonial rule, then later after the left parties, the Communist Party, other left parties, and that they were not happy anymore because this regime had let them down, and they would rather be independent and go it their own way than remain united with northern Yemen.
That is quite right. Although the further one goes to the eastern provinces of the south, there was less support for an independent southern state because of previous experiences of centralized control under the socialist regime. Nevertheless, people had realized that the agreement with the North of 1990 had not been honored to start with by the northern regime. And more importantly, after the civil war of 1994 between the North and the South, the regime of Ali Abdullah Saleh had managed to remove Southerners from all expressions of public life. They lost their jobs in the military and security services. They were not being employed as teachers or civil servants. And the regime pursued a deliberate policy of underdevelopment in the southern provinces. So people and the youth of the south felt twice as burdened by the Saleh regime than compared, let's say, to the north, because they experienced it as both a foreign imposition, an external imposition on them, and a government that does not represent them adequately.
And now, in terms of the decay of this regime, this also led to other fisiparious tendencies. For instance, the Houthis in the north near the Saudi border had been disaffected for some time with the regime. And the regime had even used the Saudis to actually come and put them down. Is that correct or not?
That is quite correct. The Houthi movement, another regional attempt at not at independence but at
Total autonomy, yeah.
Is also important in the context of Yemeni politics. It first appeared in the political field in 2004, nominally protesting the fact that the Saleh government had sided with the United States in the war on terror and had allowed Yemeni airspace and land to be used by foreigners to launch their attacks on Iraq. But the deeper roots of the problem were that the Houthis belonged to a local Zaidi Shia sect, which comprises about 40% of the country. So, I mean, they're hardly a minority. So the Zaidis had felt pressured under the Saleh regime. They were not allowed to perform their religious and traditional expressions the way they wanted. The Saleh regime had allowed Salafi, Saudi-affiliated Islamic schools to open up in the heartlands of the Zaidi community.
Quite deliberately.
Quite deliberately, yes, in order to control it. And the local Zaidi community felt not just insulted, but very much a minority in their own country. So, in short, the Houthi movement is what one would call a Zaidi revivalist movement. They do not demand independence. They up until recently, they had no interest in ruling the country or imposing the kind of rule of the whole of Yemen, but they were asking the state for regional autonomy and protection. And the response of the Saleh regime were 4 rounds of wars in the Zaidi heartland, where they attacked villages, schools, hospitals, any sort of human activity came to a standstill since 2004.
So, Thanos, summing up so far, trouble between the central state under Saleh and a huge minority of the Zaidis in the north for reasons of autonomy. Trouble between Saleh in Sana'a, the capital, and the southern Yemenis, who feel they've been tricked, deprived, discriminated against by the government. This is followed by the uprising of the youth against the Saleh dictatorship. So effectively, there are pincer movements reaching the regime, and the state is getting weaker, and then they make an attempt to topple this regime. There's an attack on the palace. Saleh is seriously wounded, is taken to Saudi Arabia for medical treatment, etc., and it looks as if everything is going to collapse and that people will get what they want, but then that doesn't happen.
No, there was a rather quick move, both by Arab countries of the Arabian Peninsula, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and the international community, spearheaded by the United States and Britain. There was this attempt to stabilize the regime, exactly because the country was facing multiple crises at the same time. People thought that a stable, robust government was needed in order to stop further disintegration. And this is where the so-called GCC agreement comes in play in November 2011, which Saleh signed with a smile in his face, probably anticipating what was going to follow, because the main points of that agreement were that Saleh was going to give up power in exchange for immunity from prosecution and being promised to be left alone in Yemen as the leader of his own political party. That agreement, of course, had as a main aim to stop the elites around the regime from fighting each other and to broker a kind of mutual understanding agreement between them. In effect, it allowed for the old regime members to remain in place and use whatever resources
they had.
So you
pretend it's change, but in fact it's no change at all.
No, even if Saleh was nominally removed as president, his major allies, and we're talking mostly about members of his own family, were still active and in their positions of responsibility within the army and the broader state apparatus. And of course, don't forget, after 34 years of rule, Saleh had developed a very extensive and very loyal network of people all over the country that were ready to help him and respond to his call whenever he felt there was need to act.
Okay, then take us through what happened. Provoke is the wrong word because no one provoked it. But what were the main reasons behind the decision of the Saudi Arabian government, which never can act on its own? Let's be frank. It was done clearly with the backing of the United States and its allies in the EU to go into Yemen and occupy the country. I mean, why did they do it?
Ever since King Salman came to power in Saudi Arabia, we've seen a shift in the way the Saudis see their role in the region. They tended to observe from a distance what happened, particularly in Yemen. But the young Minister of Defense decided that they needed to act in order to stop Sana'a from becoming a capital run by the Houthis and Saleh. And I also suppose in order to promote his own position within the broader royal succession in Saudi Arabia, he envisaged for himself the role of the person that liberated or fixed Yemen and embarked on this war without much of a plan.
But why the Americans didn't stop him?
I understand that their allies in the West were informed hours or days before the intervention, and they were not given much of a choice. But apart from that, Yemen has always been seen by the West as the back garden of Saudi Arabia. Yeah. It seems that the West has always followed the Saudi lead in terms of Yemen, mostly because the West doesn't have vital interests in the country, and of course because Saudi Arabia remains a major.
So it's like a gift to the Saudis. If you are doing it, you can do it. We're not going to object.
Quite, yes, yeah. And of course not going to show any fissures in the Saudi-Western alliance in public as such.
But Thanos, there is also inside Saudi Arabia a Shia minority which has not been treated well and which has been getting more and more angry in recent years. There have been reports of demonstrations inside Saudi Arabia, etc. So might they not have felt that unless the Yemen thing, from their point of view, is brought under control, the Houthi uprising inside Yemen might overflow into our country?
That could have certainly been part of their reasoning. At least they didn't want to see a revolutionary force so close to home being able to take over Yemen and provide the country with a kind of stable or effective rule. But Saudi Arabia shares a very extensive border with Yemen.
Yes.
And any destabilization of Yemen would be felt across the border immediately.
What is the situation in the Yemen now? I mean, could you explain where the Saudis are, how effective they are, what is happening in the Zedi areas and the south, and what, in your opinion, is going to be the likely outcome? I mean, there is a resistance, I assume.
Since the Saudis started bombarding Houthi positions in March 2015, the combined Houthi and Saleh army, as being foes in the past, the two sides came together in the face of the common enemy. So the combined forces of former President Saleh and the Houthis have been able to reach all the way down to Aden and lay siege to the city for over 2 months. The Saudi coalition, alongside the other GCC countries, minus Oman, were able to push back these forces to the center of the country and nominally, as they called it, liberate Aden and a few parts of the south. And today, as we speak, the Houthis are in control of about 25% of the country. We're talking about the northwest.
Which has always been their base.
Yeah, but they have significantly expanded beyond their traditional strongholds into other areas. But under their care lies 60% of the population, as this part of the country is the most populated. I mean, the rest is desert. And conditions on the ground have been dire for quite a long time. About 3/4 of the population are food insecure, and we are very close to a famine being declared in the country.
An official famine.
Yes, if the situation continues. One of the strategic plans of the coalition was to effectively impose a blockade on the country regarding foods, materials, petrol, anything that the country needed to function in order to stop the Houthi advance and teach them a lesson, if you will. And the trouble of this war is that it has been a war fought with small arms. So we're talking about a numerous Houthi and Saleh army overrunning parts of the country. The Saudi coalition response has been to use airplanes and the naval blockade, essentially, and drones. Yeah. Essentially, using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Yeah. And the ones paying the price for this strategy are the ordinary Yemeni people who have no access to water, electricity, food, anything. And we are in this situation today where very common and treatable ailments cause death to the population because of the lack of medication and lack of electricity in hospitals and care facilities. And to make matters worse, there have been up to today 4 Doctors Without Borders hospitals that were directly hit by Saudi airplanes, which made the Doctors Without Borders withdraw from the hospitals they were managing in North Yemen, saying that they didn't feel safe anymore to operate in that environment. The world seems to have abandoned the Yemenis to their own devices, to their own fate, at the hands of a neighboring country that seems to pay little regard to international law or the needs of civilians as such.
What would it require to turn this situation around?
I think one would need to work on two fronts. The first is the immediate needs of the Yemeni population, irrespective of which side they belong to and where they live. And there will need to be a concerted international effort to bring food and aid into the country, but also to restore its facilities. Because in the early days of the war, the coalition planes destroyed deliberately port facilities, port cranes, for example, and other facilities that the state can use to unload cargo ships, etc. Yeah. So although the ships are there offshore the country, from what I know is that they cannot reach the port and unload the food they're carrying or the fuel they're carrying. I find that on the one side, the West is sticking with what they call the legitimate government of President Hadi, which is based in Riyadh. I mean, the president has abandoned Yemen since the offensive started. On the other side, the Houthis in Saleh are showing the same sort of intransigence in their dealings with the West and the government. So some sort of compromise with the help of Oman as a mediator could see a break in this stalemate, but that could only be achieved as long as the Saudi coalition side recognized also that the Houthis have a legitimate claim and that they can be treated as an equal partner in this.
But this is to expect rationality from the Saudis, and if they were rational, if they were a rational government, they wouldn't have invaded this country in the first place, for the reasons that you have cited. So it seems that the situation is pretty desperate at the moment, and it's, you know, what is staggering is that even if we manage to organize, or some people manage to organize ships with food and medicines, from what you're saying, they couldn't unload in Aden because all the facilities had been destroyed. I mean, this is a deliberate creation of famine and mass murder. I mean, there's no other way to describe it.
That is quite true. What we've seen is that from the early days, the Saudi coalition targeted warehouses where food was stored by international aid organizations, which had been pinpointed actually to them in order for them to avoid them. They targeted factories that made juice or milk or other kinds of food, and they destroyed them. They imposed this senseless blockade, and Yemen is a country that imports 90% of its wheat, 100% of its rice and sugar. So it doesn't produce much to sustain the population. Food has to come from the outside anyway. And this is where one feels rather helpless, because I speak to friends on the ground, and often they tell me that they have the money to buy the medication that their child needs because of chronic diseases or whatever they might have, but they can't find the medication and the supplies they need in the local pharmacies. Of course, most of the Yemeni population has no access to medicine or money or anything at all. But even somebody who is well off in the country or remains affluent finds it impossible to come across the materials they need.
Thanos, thank you very much for coming and sharing these thoughts with us. It is a desperate situation, and we will follow it as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you.